So we are now recording on this session on evaluating open access journal quality, recognizing and avoiding predatory journals by Anna Kraft, today, February 11th, 2025 at 12 p.m. And again, this will be a little bit over 30, well, this will be an hour instead of our regular 30 minutes. If you have to go, we understand it is being recorded. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sam. So I put some slides in the chat, and I'm going to switch over to sharing my screen. Oops, here we go. Okay, so this session is on evaluating open access journal quality and recognizing and avoiding predatory journals. It's part of the research and application webinar series. I'm glad that y'all are here. And you're welcome to consult the slides, follow along, share them if you need to. This is me. I'm Anna Kraft. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the coordinator of scholarly communications in the university libraries at UNCG. And here's what we're going to talk about today. We'll go through each of these sections. The talk has been taking about 45 minutes when I've practiced, and then that'll leave us some time for wrap up and questions. And if you have questions as we go through this, please feel free to ask. You can put them in the chat, and Sam will ask me to stop if we are at a good point for questions. And these slides are a little bit text heavy. This is meant to be a resource for y'all. I don't expect that you'll remember everything. So bear with me. There is a lot of text on some of these. So first, we want to introduce what open access is and how it gets funded. So we'll actually start with closed access. This is the long-standing academic publication model that involves subscriptions. So in the print world, your library or you yourself as a subscriber would receive a physical journal, a print journal, and you might go to the library to read it. In the online world, it's behind a paywall. So only subscribers or people affiliated with subscribing institutions are able to get to that content. And the funding for this comes through those subscriptions. So usually it's the library or the institution that's paying to subscribe, though in some cases an individual might be the one who's choosing to pay. Open access is a newer publication model, and this is where things are free to read. So there are no sign-ins, no paywalls, no subscriptions. And as you might guess, because it's free to read, it's associated with higher readership and higher citation rates than closed access. So it can be a great way to get your scholarship out there and have people find it, read it, and cite it. But because there are no subscriptions, it has to be funded differently. There are still costs associated with producing and sharing this scholarship. Sometimes these might be funded through institutional subsidies, where an organization like UNCG or another university is basically subsidizing that journal. People are working on it as like part of their work for the university, or the university is paying for maybe the online platform and maybe paying for the journals to be indexed. But sometimes these journals are funded through APCs, or article processing charges. So this funding model is common with open access journals, and it shifts those costs to the authors. So the authors are paying this charge, or maybe their grant funder or their institution. And the publishers are using this money to recover their costs and in some cases generate revenue. So it's good for readers, but it's less good sometimes for authors. And I can definitely understand the discomfort that this can cause, especially for people who are new to this area and thinking about maybe the potentially problematic nature of this, where, all right, I'm paying to publish. Does this mean that anyone can pay to publish anything in an open access journal? So the answer is no, not if it's a quality journal. And when we think about journal quality, which we're going to be talking more about, quality open access journals can implement and follow the same kind of rigorous peer review and editorial standards that closed journals do. There doesn't need to be necessarily any difference in those kinds of standards between open and closed journals. It's really the funding model that's different, not the other things that other publication standards. So the APCs are part of publishing in many open access journals, but if it's a legitimate journal, they are not going to be charging you those fees in relation to your peer review. So you're not paying to be reviewed or paying to get your review approved. You would not pay until after your article has been reviewed and accepted for publication. And peer review practices matter, no matter where you are publishing, if you're in the academic realm. So whether you're looking at a closed journal or an open access journal, you want to be aware of what their peer review policies are. What type of peer review do they use? Is it open? Is it closed? We could talk for a long time about peer review, but we'll save that for another time, perhaps, unless y'all have questions. And what does peer reviewed mean to them? So just this week, I learned about a brand new journal. We're not going to talk about this for very long because we've got a lot of content to get through, but the link is here if y'all want to read this article. This journal is new and it's interpreting peer review pretty differently. It's once you become a member of this organization, you can publish anything. They accept all articles and they provide reviews of them. But if you're a member of this organization, your article will be published. So that is not the typical way that academic publishing works. But onward. So just like subscription-based journals, open journals can have varying levels of impact, quality, and prestige. But unfortunately, with open access, we also have to watch out for these predatory journals. And I wish we didn't have to talk about this today. I wish that this was not part of the landscape, but it is, so we want people to be aware. So let's shift over to talking more about these journals. This is a definition that I like from a comment piece in Nature a few years ago. And they tell us that predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency, and or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. And there's a fuller commentary around this if you'd like to read more, but we're going to break down this definition a little bit. So the first piece, the prioritization of self-interest, generally that's talking about money. They're prioritizing making money, but not all for-profit publishers are predatory in the way that we are talking about today. At the expense of scholarship piece. So here we're thinking about publications that maybe are not following best practices, but failing to follow best practices is not always a sign of bad intentions. Sometimes you might have a new journal that's getting started and they are still figuring out how they want to publish and what those best practices are. Or you have a journal where there's a new editorial team and they need to get up to speed on what the practices are that they should be following. So it does sometimes take time with publications and with editorial teams to get those things in place. And it's not always a sign of bad intentions that maybe they don't have all of those pieces. Where things get pretty bad, though, is this third one. So characterized by false or misleading information, where they are deliberately misleading authors and readers. And generally, the misleading and deception here is coming with saying that we are a peer-reviewed journal, and we are going to be providing these publication services like copy editing, proofreading, layout, when they're not actually doing those things. So this is a really bad sign. And then this last one, aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices, this generally refers to email. So these journals will email anyone and everyone that they can, inviting article contributions, regardless of whether that individual is actually a scholar in that area. And we'll look at some examples as we go through this. And I do want to say a few things about this predatory terminology. So there are people who consider those really big for-profit publishers with high APC costs and high profit margins to be predatory with no relationship to journal quality. So even if it's a quality journal, if it's one of these big high-cost publishers, they would refer to that as predatory. But that's not the definition that we're operating under today. Also, as you might guess, journals and publishers don't like being labeled as predatory, especially in public, even if they are perhaps operating under predatory practices. So we have to kind of take some care with how we talk about this in the public sphere and how we are labeling journals. There have been some lawsuits in the past with people who have created lists of these things and shared them publicly. Also, please note that some people don't like this term, just don't like predatory in this context, and might prefer another term: misleading, deceptive, exploitative, fraudulent. There are a lot of different terms that can be used in this context, but the most common one that I see is predatory. So that's the one that we're using today. What are these publishers and journals trying to do? They're trying to make money from your scholarship without adding any value. So they're charging those publication fees, but they're not providing that quality control of editorial or peer review, and not providing like copy editing, layout, proofreading, but they are telling authors that they do. And sometimes it can be difficult to tell that they are lying to you. The impact here, as you might guess, includes wasted money. This could include funds from your institution. It could include grant funds. This can also impact authors. If you're going up for review, for reappointment or tenure, or for perhaps a job, and someone sees that you've got a predatory publication on your CV, that could cause the legitimacy of your scholarship to be called into question. So that can have impacts on careers. This can also impact readers. So you have unreviewed scholarship that's being presented as having been through that peer review. This can mislead readers, and that can have consequences for readers and other authors who might be citing and trying to build on that work. So we really don't want to be publishing or reading or citing these journals. And there are some different types of predatory journals. These are not technical terms. These are just kind of colloquial terms, and others might be used as well. But these are some of the kinds of flavors that you might see of bad actors in this realm. So an imposter journal is where you have a real quality journal, but another journal, a predatory journal, is using the same title. Perhaps it's using the same international standard serial number, the ISSN, the web design, or the URL, or maybe a near match of one of those. Maybe the URL is one or two letters off and it's an easy typo, and they've constructed their site to look like that other site. So they're trying to trick people into thinking they are the real journal. So you've got journals that are masquerading as others. We also have situations where we have what we refer to as hijacked journals, where we had a quality journal, but perhaps the management has changed or the editorial policy has changed. And the content then has moved from going through those rigorous peer reviews to just publishing anything. But they are banking on people still associating them with that quality that they had in the past. A zombie journal is when we had a legitimate journal, but it has stopped publishing. And perhaps lost its online domain name. And then another journal, a bad actor comes in and takes that domain name or title, and again is kind of masquerading as that quality journal and hoping that people will not do their homework. We also have just plain old predatory journals that aren't pretending to be a different journal, but are still operating under those deceptive practices when it comes to review and quality. So there's a lot going on in this area, unfortunately. Many of these predatory journals claim to be open access. And since many legitimate open journals and predatory journals use those article processing charges as their payment model, we have to be really careful when we are selecting an open journal to publish in. And sadly, there are not just predatory journals. That's what we're focusing on today, but you can also encounter predatory conferences, predatory book publishers, and not predatory, but not scholarly publishing services like vanity presses, which will publish anything, and research marketing firms. And in these cases, they're not deceiving authors. They just are not scholarly opportunities. So they would be glad to have you pay them to publish your work, but it's not necessarily going to help your academic career. So there's a lot to watch out for. So now let's talk about some tools and strategies for evaluating journal quality, but I will pause in case there are any questions. All right, I will blaze forward.
There's none in the chat right now.
All right, thanks, Sam. All good. Okay, so critical thinking is really your first line of defense. Often these journals are sending out email solicitations, and if you receive something like that to publish in a journal that you don't know, or maybe you see a call for contributions to a special issue from an unfamiliar publisher or journal, you want to investigate first. Don't send them your work. Do your research before you consider doing that. And you can contact the library for help with this. You can contact me. You can contact your liaison librarian. So here are some tips when you get an email like that. Again, research before you respond. Do not click on links in the email. So start with your search engine and see what comes up. If you do get to that journal website, do you see red flags with language, grammar, professionalism? Look at some of their recently published content. Sometimes predatory journals do include real scholarship that can stand on its own, where an author has been tricked into submitting their work. But you may also see really nonsensical or out of scope papers. And seeing that is one red flag that this is not somewhere you want to publish, that no quality control is happening. And don't just read about what the journal says about itself. Look for information from others. This is called lateral reading. And one way you can do this is by going to your preferred search engine and looking up the journal. And if you've done these things and you're still not sure, again, you can contact us in the library. So some ways to gather information about a journal, again, using your search engine. And one tactic that I use often is to type in the name of the journal and just add the word predatory. I'll show an example of that in a minute and talk a little bit about how to think about that, but that's one starting point. You can check the Directory of Open Access Journals, or DOAJ. This is a great resource for indexing and bringing together a list of quality open access journals. And we'll look at that as well. You can check other academic search and indexes and see if the journal or its content is included. Wikipedia can be a good resource. I'll show an example of that with finding information about past history of the publisher, and that often includes links to documentation. And there's some other online tools that we'll look at as well. Do remember, though, that things change over time. Journal practices can change, journals can move to different publishers, editorial boards can change. So because a journal was good or bad at one point, doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. Also, the internet doesn't know everything. And also note that you don't have to use all of the tools and strategies that we're going to talk about every time you want to evaluate a journal. This is like your toolbox. So you can decide what tools you like, which ones you want to use, and when you want to use them. So here's an example of a Google search. Do remember that anyone can say anything on the internet, so we always have to think about the source, where something is coming from. But this is a search related to an actual question that I had not that long ago about the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. And I added the word predatory, and immediately there are some articles. This one looks like it's coming up from perhaps an individual scholar's blog, and it's talking about this journal. And if we clicked through, we would learn more about it being removed from an index from Clarivate on Web of Science, which is bad. So we don't want to see that about a journal that we're considering. But if you're seeing these discussions of potential journal or publishers operating under these practices, sometimes if there's smoke, there is fire, and you may need to do some more research. But again, consider the source. So I might go to the directory of open access journals and look up the publication. If it's included, that's a positive sign. Again, the DOAJ review is looking at the journal at one point in time, and things can change. So we want to keep that in mind. If a journal is not included, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It could mean it's new. It could mean it hasn't applied yet for DOAJ indexing. It could also, though, mean that the journal has been rejected or removed. And unfortunately, they don't keep a list, at least not publicly, of journals that have been rejected or removed, as far as I know, probably because of legal reasons. So here I'm searching for that same journal. And this journal used to be in DOAJ, but is not anymore. And the only reason I know that is because of prior searches and questions that I have done related to this journal. So this is a bad sign. They have been delisted from this service. And here I've searched for the Journal of Avian Biology. I want to see some other examples. So we got 3 results that relate to ornithology and birds. And these little brief results could tell us who is publishing them, where they're based, what languages they use, some subjects, and we can see a little bit of information about charges and licensing rights when you publish. When I click through to one of these journals, I can see a fuller record, and this is just a snippet of the information. So it tells us about the costs in different currencies, about best practices that they might be operating under, and tells us more about who the publisher is, if they're associated with different professional or academic societies, and stuff like that. So this journal being listed here is a positive sign for anyone wanting to publish open access with them. A little bit more about indexing. So in the context that we're talking about today, indexing means inclusion in academic databases and search systems, and there are tons of them out there. If a journal is being selected or has applied and makes it through the review for inclusion in scholarly indexes, this is usually a positive sign, though of course practices can change over time. There are so many indexes out there, a few of them listed here: Academic Search Complete, DOAJ that we just looked at, Google Scholar, PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science. There are tons. And indexing, we want this not just to be a sign that the journal is operating under good practices and has quality content. Indexing is important for readers finding your work. Usually readers are not going to individual journal websites. They're going to a larger index to start their search. And that index helps make your work more visible and accessible so readers can find your work, read it, and cite it. So is a journal indexed? You might look at their website or what they say in their email solicitation. What do they say about indexing? Do you recognize the things? Are they actual legitimate scholarly indexes? And then looking to see if they are actually indexed in those services or in others that you use. So consider checking your preferred indexes or search systems to see if you can find content from the journal. So here I did a quick search in Academic Search Complete, which we have access to here at UNCG, for the Journal of Avian Biology. And I got a ton of results. This first one has it not just in the title of this article, but we see this in Journal of Avian Biology. So here I know that this journal, content from this journal, is in this system, which is a positive sign. Google Scholar has a ton of stuff in it, and they aren't very open about how they decide to get content in here or the criteria that they're using. So this is a little bit opaque, but it's still a potential place to start and is freely available to people. So I did another search for this journal, and here we have to use some of our critical thinking skills because we see there's a lot going on. So we're seeing Journal of Avian Biology mentioned. We also want to look at where it's coming from. So it looks like these first couple might be coming from institutional repositories or associated with EDU addresses. This next one, this third one, we see Journal of Avian, ... Wiley Online Library, PDF, wiley.com. So this is coming from that publisher. Wiley is the publisher for this journal. And this tells me that this journal is actually being indexed from the publisher site, which is a positive sign. So we are not subscribers to Web of Science, but this is another place you can check for free. You won't be able to get to most content from it, but you can check to see if a journal is indexed. So here I searched for the same journal, Journal of Avian Biology, and it brings up exact match found and a little brief result record about this journal. Who is the publisher? What's the ISSN? What indexes or collections associated with Web of Science is this in? So again, this is a positive result, positive sign for this particular journal. Wikipedia is another great place to check. Some publishers have very long evaluation and controversy or scandal sections that can be interesting to read. This particular one is for the publisher MDPI, which has a kind of, well, they have done many things in the past, and they have some good journals, but they have had some problems. And their Wikipedia scandals section goes back to 2013. If we did scroll all the way down to the end of the section, we would get into things that have been happening in very recent times, including some of their journals being delisted from major sites last year, major indexes very recently. So this can be a good place to read about publisher behavior and journal behavior as well. Sometimes it's not the publisher that is the problem. It might be the editorial team for a specific journal. So there can be some kinds of gray areas where maybe it's not this publisher that's bad, it's some of these journals. There are also sites like Think, Check, Submit. And this offers a checklist that can help you walk through some of the considerations for if you want to publish with a journal. And this is their checklist. It's freely available online. And some of these concepts we've talked about already: indexing, peer review, fees, and others we will be talking about as well. So these are some starting points that you can use when thinking about journal quality. There's a more detailed rubric available through Journal Evaluation Tool. This was created by a group of librarians, one of whom used to work at UNCG. And this the snippet here just shows part of it. It's pretty detailed. And it looks at different practices in different areas of a journal and helps you assign points based on what their policies or practices are. So this is freely available online, and anyone can use it. There are also websites that track predatory journals. Again, we have to use some judgment and critical thinking when we are using these. So we have to consider who is creating it, who is maintaining it. We have to think about if they share the criteria that are used when adding things to the list, or are they kind of opaque about that? How old is this list? Is it still being updated or maintained? One of the longstanding, perhaps first ones of these was Beale's List, created by a librarian in Colorado, and it got him in a lot of trouble with his institution and with a particular publisher that did not want to be labeled as predatory. So to my knowledge, that list is not being updated anymore. So think of it as like a snapshot in time and not something that we can necessarily get all of the information we would need right now from it. A more current resource is the Retraction Watch Hijacked Journal Checker. And this is specifically looking at publications where you've got another group perhaps taking over from a legitimate journal and that journal quality going down. So that's a spreadsheet that you can, if you click through here, it'll take you to a website that gives you some context, and you can get to the spreadsheet from that. And that one is maintained and updated pretty regularly. But again, with any of these lists that are out there, you need to think critically about what the situation is before you rely on their information. And again, Not all of the problematic solicitations we get are necessarily predatory. We've got those vanity presses that are paid to publish, and they don't have peer review or quality control necessarily, but they also aren't telling you that those things are provided. So they're not deceiving authors in that way. We also increasingly see commercial and marketing opportunities where non-academic companies are reaching out to researchers and trying to get them to pay for services that might showcase or promote scholarship to the public and that you would pay for. This might be useful to certain people who are trying to get their scholarship in front of the public. But this is not, if you're trying to build your academic career, this is probably not the place you want to start. And it is possible to get contacted by a legitimate publisher or journal that wants you to publish with them. For me, this has happened to me, a handful of times. It does happen, but I've gotten way more solicitations from predatory journals. So those are way more common. So here's an example of a commercial solicitation. And what they're telling us here is, we are committed to making all research more accessible and engaging. We distribute the content we produce strategically to people in industry, government, and the public to help bridge the gap between often complex bodies of research and these audiences. So this is not a scholarly opportunity. And again, this could be useful in certain cases, but don't be confused about what this is. They are not telling you that they are going to publish and peer review your scholarship. They are trying to get you to pay them to get you in front of the public. So considering these different formats and audiences is not necessarily bad, but it may not line up with your goal. So here are two that I have gotten within the last few years. One that wanted to create a podcast of my research, and one that wanted to create a scientific animation of my research. Neither of these things would actually be useful for me, and I don't think they would be very interesting based on the stuff that I've been publishing. But who knows? Anyway, I did not want to pay for these things. So if you see stuff like this, read it, consider what it is, consider if it relates to what you're trying to do. All right, now we're going to look at some examples of predatory journals. Okay. Sadly, there is not one thing that we can use, one criterion that we can look at for each journal that can easily be applied that would tell us, yes, this is predatory, or no, this is not. There are lots of potential red flags, and there are also some gray areas. And sadly, every situation is a little bit different. So it can be tricky. And actually, the tips that ITS at UNCG has shared to stay safe from phishing can also be applicable for a lot of these emails that you might get from predatory journals. That kind of triggering of an emotional reaction. There's also often a lot of flattery and predatory solicitations where they're telling you how much they have loved your work. They will often ask for very quick turnarounds, quick responses to their emails, or quick payment. Something might seem just kind of off. It might claim to be from someone that you know or someone you've heard of, but maybe things don't quite match up. And this kind of out of the ordinary thing. If the website doesn't seem right, if the file sharing or the payment seems not quite right or unprofessional, it probably is. And is it too good to be true? Same thing when it comes to publishing opportunities. It probably is. But here are the things we're going to walk through right now. And I'll go into each of these with examples on the following slides. So does this solicitation relate to my area of expertise? This is a really common problem. So many predatory journals are contacting potential authors just indiscriminately. They'll contact anyone without any regard for if that person's work matches with their scope. So here's one I got that invited me to publish in the American Journal of Engineering Research. I'm married to someone who has an engineering background, but otherwise I don't have any credentials in this area. So this is something that I can just delete. And here I'm being invited to submit a presentation to the third edition of World Congress on Geology and Earth Science. So this is a predatory conference. And my only qualification that I'm aware of is that I wrote an article once that included landscape in the title, but it had nothing to do with geology or earth sciences. It had to do with libraries. And another red flag we see here is this geology at meetingsllc.com. So that sounds like a for-profit business, which is what many predatory conferences are. So again, I save stuff like this because I think it's kind of funny and I use them in presentations like this. But this is the sort of thing that you may see, especially if you are publishing and getting your work out there and these predatory journals are seeing and finding it. I get a lot of solicitations from dentistry and oral health predatory journals because I once published an article that included the term oral histories in the title. So they're not, using broader context when they're getting these keywords. They're just matching up, okay, oral, send her the dentistry stuff. So I don't need to be publishing in this journal. I have no qualifications. And related to that, has my information been harvested from a legitimate site, like a legitimate place that I've published or presented? The way that a lot of these journals are getting people's contact information is from citations from legitimate publications or conferences. So they're seeing that you've published, they know you're an academic, they know that's their target market, they're getting your email address, seeing what keywords you've published under, and then contacting you. So watch out for solicitations that address you in a name format that's funny, that you might associate with citations, or where your keywords have been matched up without any context about if it's actually the right usage. So Dear Craft AR, this was pulled out of a citation, and they've probably got a little macro here where they're pulling the name for the greeting and they're pulling the paper title. And we see some writing that maybe is not quite right. It's honored to have read your published article. So we've got some problems here. Even though this is a journal that's within my field, ostensibly American Journal of Information Science and Technology, I don't want to be publishing here. Here's another one of these dentistry ones. Invitation to join the editorial board as section editor for Probe Dentistry, which sounds awful. I don't know what that is. So this is a different kind of predatory solicitation where they are trying to get legitimate authors to make them as a journal seem more legitimate, not just by publishing, but by serving as on an editorial board. And this is one way that predatory journals try to legitimize themselves and kind of trick authors. They say, oh, this is someone I know. This must be a quality journal, when actually maybe the editorial board has been tricked into being part of the journal. But again, because this is dentistry, this is not my thing. We also have to think about scope. So does the scope of the publication make sense? Most journals, not all in academia, but many are not publishing, in all areas. They're publishing within a niche area under a broader discipline. And this is one reason this is important is we want them to have reviewers that have expertise in the area. And it can be harder to maintain that a really broad list of reviewers. You might not have someone with all kinds of expertise, but if you've got kind of that smaller scope, you likely have knowledge of who is working in that area, who can be a reviewer. And that's the kind of editorial control that we want with journals we're publishing in. So look at their aims and scope. Do they align with your work? Do they make sense? Is the journal actually publishing works that match that scope? To find this information, you might look at journal information on their website, aims and scope, about the journal, something like that on their website. Here's one of my favorite examples, International Journal of Arts and Social Science. And in a moment, we will see a different piece of this particular solicitation. But here we're looking at the scope. So this came in an email. International Journal of Arts and Social Science is an international journal which aims at meeting all the needs of diverse sections of people in the areas of humanities and social studies. That's pretty broad. So this immediately throws up some alarms here. Other things that cause some questions: secured websites. I mean, they all should be, we hope, but including that in how you're advertising yourself causes some questions to come up. And how many times are they going to say that they're international? All right, so we also have to think about the publication timeline. Publication timelines across academic journals can really vary, but regardless, we need to make sure that they are actually allowing time for authors to submit, and then for the editors to review, for peer reviewers to review and send back their results, for maybe revisions and resubmission to happen. Then once it's accepted, copy editing, proofreading, layout or typesetting, and publication. Generally, online journals, well, any journal, things tend to go more toward the it's taking a long time than it's happening too quickly. But with predatory journals, we will see some really unrealistic timelines. First, we've got some examples from some established journals at a major publisher, Springer Nature, that give us some examples of how their transparency around their publication timelines. This first column, submission to first editorial decision. This is just that the editor gets your paper and they say, yes, this is within scope, we're sending it for peer review, or no, this is not within scope, you need to send this somewhere else. So it doesn't mean that you have made it through peer review, you're definitely not accepted, it's just that first editorial look. Submission to first post-review decision. This means peer reviewers have reviewed your manuscript and sent back feedback that is maybe revise and resubmit, reject. It can vary. And here we're seeing that it's taking maybe a little over a month, sometimes 2 months, sometimes longer. So it can take a while. Submission to accept, at this point, you have not been published yet. You have been through the reviews and done your revisions, and the journal has said, yes, we are going to publish this. And at this point, the shortest one we see with Nature Cancer is 82 days, so almost 3 months. Some of these are much longer. Of course, it's going to vary among journals, but this is the sort of thing that you might see on a journal site that tells you some context about their expected timelines. Here we're going back to that International Journal of Arts and Social Sciences solicitation. The submission deadline was July 20th. They were going to say accept or reject in 5 to 6 days. I imagine they're accepting everything. And then your paper would be published online by July 30th. What do you think is going to happen in those 10 days? I would guess that they are going to receive your paper, say, yes, we accept, maybe put some branding for the journal on it, and then put it online. They're not going to look at it otherwise. So this is not a realistic timeline. We definitely don't want to be publishing here. We also have to think about who is soliciting our work. Do I know the publisher? Do I know the person? Are they an academic? You don't necessarily have to know them personally, but thinking about, are they affiliated with a university or a research institution? Are they writing from an edu email account or something like that? What's their role? Does it make sense that they would be soliciting content? Are they a legitimate researcher in my discipline? Have they perhaps been duped into guest editing a special issue for a predatory publication? Sadly, this happens sometimes. So here's one of my favorite recent ones, solicited by Anne Hathaway. I think sometimes they try to use very recognizable names. So Open Access Journal of Kinesiology and Sports Medicine. This one actually may have come to one of our researchers who sent it to me. But we see some of this acknowledge this email within 24 hours, kind of putting that time limit on there, trying to get people to feel like they have to react. Here's another one where I'm being solicited by the Journal of Oral Infection and Pathology. based on your eminent expertise and immense contributions. This one's coming from Christine Dale at this journal. Don't know who she is otherwise. Don't have any context. And when we look at this submission portal, scholarjournal.biz, this is probably not somewhere we want to send our work. Also, we want to be pretty wary of special issues, especially if they are from unfamiliar publishers. This is one way that predatory journals make a lot of money, by publishing many special issues, and sometimes getting legitimate researchers to serve as the special editor, guest editor of a particular special issue. So this particular one went to one of our researchers, and she asked me if it was real. And there are a lot of red flags here. So Annals of Applied Sports Science, no pain, no gain. Most academic publications are not going to have a cute little slogan. I guess it's possible, but this isn't very professional. And this could be a completely legitimate researcher who does good work, who's their guest editor here. But what I would guess is more likely is that they got a predatory solicitation to be the guest editor, and now this journal is trying to get other legitimate researchers to pay to submit their work to this predatory journal. So be wary of special issues. There can be good ones, but there are a lot of bad ones out there. We've already seen some examples of this with professionalism and problems in this area. So does the language make sense? Does it reflect what you would expect from a professional publisher? We hope you don't disappoint us. Acknowledge this email within 24 hours. Probably don't want to publish there. We have learned about your precious paper. The paper might be precious to me, but this is not the sort of thing that we see from legitimate journals. This is a predatory tactic, that kind of flattery. Successfully, we have released enormous issues towards our online journal of dentistry and oral health. A single candle, your article, would be a big asset. No idea what that means. But this, OJ Doe is one of my favorites when it comes to getting content for talks like this. We also have to think about the cost. Are there APCs? If so, is the publisher clear about how much it costs to publish, what the currency used is, and how payments are made? So the use of APCs is pretty common in open access journals, including with legitimate journals, as we've talked about, but the journals should be very transparent about what the cost is going to be. So if something seems off, avoid it. So here, a lot of problems happening here, including this really interesting font for the ISSN, but online publication charges are 1,000, I don't know if this is rupees, but that raises a red flag for me. Also, fast track publication within 48 hours, there's a lot going on here. And most legitimate journals are not going to provide you an e-certificate for your published article within 4 hours. You're just going to be published. Also, we don't tend to see discounts on APCs based on submission timelines or like buy one, get one free kinds of deals for publishing. There are sometimes discounts related to maybe being a student or being a peer reviewer for a journal. Like those are the kinds of things we might expect. But more frequently, they don't really do discounts. And if they do, it's something that you would need to write them individually about, maybe to explain a financial situation and ask for a waiver or a discount. We also see some wild spelling up here. Our submission was, I guess that's a website. A lot going on here. And is the journal really what it claims to be? So this is getting into those imposter and hijacked or zombie journals. And let's look at an example. So here we've got two different Journal of Pharmacy and Pharmacology journals. On the left, the real journal from Oxford, associated with the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. This is a legitimate journal. It's been around since the late 1800s. On the right, we have an email solicitation that one of our grad students received from a journal with the same title, published by David Publishing Company. So this is a predatory journal on the right that is trying to get authors to think that they are the real journal. You can't copyright a title, so technically it's legal for there to be two things that have the same title. But this kind of behavior where you're pretending to be something else is a major predatory tactic. We also see publishers that are having this problem. So this is a journal, International Journal of Asian Studies from Cambridge, and they have a notice on their main page. We've become aware that these websites are claiming to offer publication in certain Cambridge University press journals for a fee. We do not work with them. So they're telling people not to be taken in by this, and that the only way you can submit to this journal is by the site that is linked from this website. So don't be making payments to someone else that's telling you that they will get you published here. So there's so many problems with predatory journals and so many red flags, but unfortunately not all of these journals, their websites, their emails show these immediate glaring red flags. Some of them are getting better in terms of looking more legitimate, sadly. But if they're unfamiliar to you, you always want to evaluate it carefully before you submit your work. Okay, we're going to wrap up here. We do have a few minutes. So the thought I want to leave y'all with is that if you do need assistance with evaluating publication venues, please contact the library. You can contact your liaison librarian. And if you're not sure who that is, this link will take you to a list. You can also contact me. I help people with this regularly. So I've got a link here for the slides. And if you do have questions, definitely ask. We do have some time. Okay. Thanks, y'all. I know this was kind of a long session, so I appreciate you hanging with me for all this information. Are there any questions? Or has anyone received any fun or funny predatory solicitations recently? Thanks, Sam, for sharing that evaluation. Oh, good. Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, this is, sadly, it's not something that we want people to have to deal with. And, no one is born knowing what a predatory journal is. So we definitely want to make sure that authors are finding out about this and are aware that this can happen. Because we definitely don't want y'all to be taken in by these predatory publications. Oh, good. That next webinar sounds useful.
Yeah, we have kind of, I feel like, a theme this semester, spring. Yeah, sorry, my kids are having lunch. You can hear it. So, okay, well, thank you all for coming. I know that there's about 5 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, if anyone's typing, let me know. But if not, thank you, Anna. This was really useful. You'll all receive a link to the recording and stream through the email and the YouTube version, as well as the slides again, as well as that link to an assessment and reminders about the upcoming webinar. And there's still plenty of time to sign up. And thank you all. Have a good week.
Yes. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, y'all. And if questions come up now or later, you can always reach out. All right.